Hello, everyone. My name's Rach. I'm a very grateful, recovered alcoholic and addict. It's such a pleasure to be here with you on this book study, Friday night book study. Absolutely love it. So, welcome to everyone. We are in Bill's story. So, we're on page 12 of Bill's story. And just to kind of go over, just in case anybody is newer around or new to this book study. Um, when going through any of these chapters, but especially talking about Bill Wilson or the doctor's opinion, when I'm reading it with a sponsee, I always ask them, do you know who Bill Wilson is? Do you know who Dr. Silkworth is? Do you know what they look like? And just give like a roundabout uh, explanation of who that person is. I set sponsees a little bit of homework to go and look up who Bill Wilson is, and just to do a little brief overview. So, Bill Wilson is the co-founder of AA, and he's doing a main share here in his story. The fellowship came from the big book, so they didn't have all of these meetings with everyone sharing their experience, strength, and hope. It came from this. So Bill Wilson is trying to get that all important identification thing that's going to grab newcomers' attention and sort of say, oh, is that me? Did I think like that? Do I think like that? Did I drink like that? Do I feel like that? Did I act like that? Um, so we're really looking for identification here. And he starts off telling us how his life was. He's quite driven. He's got this drive to prove to the world that he was important, which is like his first example of the hole in the soul. He's chasing something, you could say, sort of this restless, irritable and discontentedness that's getting him to seek something outside of himself. And he found alcohol, and he's got this alcoholic mentality. He's gone to study all these different things, but he's chasing business and financial leaders, this ego of proving himself. Um, and it all started off really well. And he was quite headstrong, and he had this idea about stocks and how people were losing money, and he went for it. He went against everything, and him and Lois went on this massive venture on a motorcycle with sidecar stuff, with financial references, and he went off to try and chase his dream, and then he sort of you start to see the progression. Drinking took a really important part of his life, and things started to get worse. And Dr. Silkworth has told us that it gets worse, and Bill Wilson brilliantly explains how drinking just became more and more of a problem until he was completely powerless. He'd already crossed over that invisible line. And so all the way up until, page 8, he's sort of showing us the progression of his illness. And then at the bottom of page 8, Ebby Thatcher comes to see him. And this is a massive turning point, because Ebby was the crazy alky friend who was like worse than Bill Wilson. And Bill thought that he'd been locked up for alcoholic insanity, and Ebby is 2 months sober. He got saved from, being locked up from these two guys in the Oxford group, who their uncle was the judge, and he sat there across the table, and he didn't do any ranting. He just refused to drink, and he said, "I've got religion." And Bill Wilson could see that his friend had something happen to him. He was reorganized. He was completely changed. He had sparkle in his eye, and he looked different. And what this started to do for Bill Wilson is it started to get him thinking about his own conception of God. What were his old ideas about religion? He started to think about his granddad and sitting on the hillside away from the church, and he still had this kind of prejudice and antipathy. He describes it as a certain antipathy, which means a deep feeling of aversion. You know, he doesn't want to be told, but he's always believed in something. So his mind is just starting to open. And it's a beautiful example of, you know, how can I start opening my mind? How can I start letting go of my old ideas? Um, yeah, so we left off on page 12, and on a beautiful bit of the book where we'll just go a couple of lines back. My friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. So we're just halfway down the page. He said, and this is in italics, so it cost them a lot more money to change this font. This is really important because it's like it's weaving step 2 in here to Bill's story. So why don't you choose your own conception of God? Now that statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. And I love this bit because it's like he's saying all of a sudden before something has changed in him, because he said before, you know, on page 10 at the bottom, he's like, I became irritated and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. And then on page 12, he's saying, when the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. But then something has shifted in him. And where it says it melted the icy intellectual mountain, I think of like this huge cold, like if you think of the size of a mountain that's blocking me off from the sunlight of the spirit, it kind of gives me a visual of what have I got blocking me? Like, you know, cold. I think of him being cold and alone in the dark. It's intellectual. You know, if you heard the saying that it's got to go from your head to your heart. So this idea of just being so stubborn and cold and dark with this big, massive block in the way. Um, and it's saying it's melted this intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years, stood in the sunlight at last. So imagine like thawing out. You've been cold and stubborn behind this big mountain, and then all of a sudden it's like, and he talks about this whole, you know, new world coming into view in a minute. So it was only, we've got more italics here, so imagine it in neon flashing lights. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. So capital P, I've squiggly underlined being willing. You know, there's these themes that go through the book, all the way through the book, about being useful, powerlessness, helplessness, being willing. It's a key thing that we need. Um, and then here's a lovely reassuring statement. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. So I always love when the book references a beginning, commence, start, because it means that wherever I am in my program, however, you know, we've got people on here that are new in, we've got people in here, you know, nearly 40 years in, and it's like, this is infinite, right? So nothing more, being willing, there's nothing more to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. There's another little reference to growth. I love it when he's got lots of references to building and foundations, and he's also got lots of references to growth and nature, which I love as well. So upon a foundation of complete willingness, so there's that foundation, you know, like a building reference, that baseline foundation of complete willingness. I like that it says complete. That means absolutely, you know, unwavering, complete willingness. Could even put a little question in there. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? There's a really good question. Do I want it? Whenever I'm working with a sponsee, I'm always asking them, do you want this? You know, it's a good question to ask ourselves at any given point. Of course I would. Thus, I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want Him enough, capital H. I put a question mark in there. So, you know, I've got so many question marks in this book because I love to kind of ask myself these questions and also ask sponsees. And it's saying, you know, Bill Wilson was then convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough, or do I want him enough? Am I am I willing to put in the time and energy? Am I willing to believe? At long last, I saw, I felt, I believed. So this is Bill Wilson sharing with us his spiritual experience, his coming to believe. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. Um, I love that bit. A new world came into view because, you know, for anybody who has experienced um, the 12 steps and maybe, you know, giving this stuff away or having a spiritual awakening, and it's so strange how nothing could have changed. Like you might still have the same family, be in the same house, have the same job, but a new perspective comes into play, you know. And this is Bill Wilson explaining that to us. And I like to think that this can keep on happening, like these new revelations, these new understandings, this new consciousness, this new world could come in at any time, as long as I'm willing and I put in the action. So the real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. So this is the third reference that Bill Wilson has made to the cathedral. The first one was on page 1, where he talked about seeing the ominous warning on the doggerel. And then you just flick to it. Oh, uh, sorry, there we go. Yeah, so much moved. I visited Winchester Cathedral, much moved. I wandered outside. My attention was caught. So it had this God incidence about seeing, seeing this tombstone and realizing that somebody that went to war died from alcoholism and not from, uh, not from a musket, which is a shotgun. The second reference is on page 10, where he talks about that wartime day in old Winchester Cathedral came back again. And then this is the third reference. So he's remembering this amazing, like God incidents, this experience that he's having. For a brief moment, I had needed, welcome to all of those that have joined. I had needed and wanted God. Question mark. Do I need and want God? There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. And I love that it says humble willingness. Humble meaning right sized. Yeah. Humble, no better, no worse. Understanding my my humility, who I am as a mere human, not, not this big shot that I thought I was. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, capital H, and he came. So there's a promise. And I don't know if you can, agree with this, but in my own experience, when I have a humble willingness to have God there, God is always there. It's only when I get disconnected, when I'm so wrapped up in the bondage of self, that I'm like, oh, I can't see straight. So, but soon, here we go. Oh, soon the sense of his presence, to hate, had been blotted out by worldly clamours. Oh, who can relate to this? Mostly those within myself. What? Question mark. Um, so when I always sort of like visuals when I'm thinking about stuff, blotted out, I think of it like a big sponge on a plate of black paint, blotting out the consciousness of God, this sunlight of the spirit, this light. And its clamors means loud uproar. So this loud uproar within myself has blotted out the consciousness of of God's presence. And so it had been ever since. How blind I had been. Question mark. Have you ever felt like, wait a minute, there's all this love and light in the world, but actually I've just been so wrapped up and confused and stubborn, shivering behind this icy cold mountain of intellect or, my old ideas. So at the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. So, delirium tremens, for anybody that doesn't know, is when your body is, coming off alcohol. It doesn't, and you could literally have a heart attack because of the DTs. It's your body is addicted to the alcohol, and it's dangerous to just come off. And lots of people have died in that way. So what Bill Wilson is going to do on this page is he's actually going to take us through his experience of going through the steps. So there I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him to do with me as he would. So that's Bill Wilson explaining his step 3. He decided to turn his will and his life over to the care of God. I placed myself unreservedly. There's a really good word. Am I placing myself unreservedly, without reserve, under his care and direction? I don't know about you, but sometimes I can miss these little words, care and direction. It says care in step 3, doesn't it? But also direction. Am I trusting that God knows the way, but I just need to tap in? So unreservedly under his care and direction, I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. I haven't actually got a step near that. I think, have I got a 3 there? But admitted, it could align with step 1, couldn't it? Admitted, and being lost. I love this bit. I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing. So ruthlessly faced my sins is step 4, isn't it? And 5. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves and admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And I've squiggly underlined ruthlessly, business-like fashion, fact-finding, fact-facing, and became willing to have my newfound friend, capital F, take them away, root and branch. At 6 and 7, were entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character, and then humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. So my newfound friend, take them away, root and branch. And again, I love that kind of reference to growth, root and branch. On page 62, where it says the root of my troubles is selfishness and self-centeredness. And again, with the little visual, I like to think about, if the root of my troubles is selfishness and self-centeredness, everything that comes out of that plant, that everything that flowers off that root is going to be attached to the selfishness and self-centeredness. But he's saying here that my newfound friend will take them away, root and branch. So, hopefully just go right to the core, deep down. I have not had a drink since. So permanent recovery. This is what we've got on offer. Permanent recovery. Bill Wilson suffered from, extreme bouts of depression, and he had, he tells us, doesn't he, that he had loads of troubles. I mean, I watched the documentary with him in, actually. I might post that in the group. It's so brilliant because it's just loads of pictures and, like history about the whole, how AA came about. I'll post it in the group. So my schoolmate visited me and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. So that's step 5, isn't it? Doing a step 5, admitting to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. We made a list, sounds like step 8 to me, of people I had hurt or towards whom I felt resentment. So I put a little, uh, 5 next to that. And I think I've got 4 as well, who I'd hurt and who I felt resentment, 4 and 5. I expressed my entire willingness. Great when they explain how willing, entire willingness. So that's step 8, isn't it? To approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. And so that's step 9. Never was I to be critical of them. Got that highlighted. They tell us throughout the book, when it comes to 8 and 9, they're like, we avoid we avoid fault finding and criticizing like the plague. They tell us so many times that the inventory is ours, not the other person's. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability. Circled that all. It's not just some. That's not the ones that I just want to do. All such matters to the utmost of my ability. That's step 9. I was to test my thinking by my new God consciousness within. So this is step 11. Test my thinking by the new God consciousness. I've squiggly underlined consciousness. That means awake, to be aware, to be present, to be alert, to be, truth finding. And I've also underlined within, because it's another reminder that this God consciousness is within when I sit down quietly and follow the direction, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understand Him. Praying only for direction. Oh my God, have I just forgotten the step? I just suddenly praying only for direction to do the right thing. One sec, let me get it, because I'm gonna praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. I just doubted myself for a second there. So I was to sit. Oh yeah, this bit used to confuse me. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I remember that kind of baffling my head a little bit. Common sense uh, thus becoming would thus become uncommon sense. So again, everything I think I know, my idea of common sense might not be the truth. I love this little visual of, you guys might have seen me do it before, but this is my understanding about life, about my experience, what I know, what I feel, what I think, what I believe. And what recovery has done for me has gone like that, and just given me a whole new insight and a whole new open-mindedness to what else could be. So common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly. There's some direction. This is still step 11. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength. Good words. And I've circled only as well, because it says only in step 11. Only for direction and strength to meet my problems as He would have me. So more direction there about, it's not about what I want or what I think. I'm sitting down quietly asking for God's direction, God's strength. This is like a step 3 prayer, isn't it? I haven't got 3 in there because this reminds me of step 11. But never was I to pray for myself, is a good warning, except as my requests bore on my usefulness to others. There's that thread again. Usefulness, full of use. How can I be helpful? What can I do to be useful? Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. That would be as God sees fit. And it depends, I guess, on how much time and energy am I putting into following this clear-cut direction. I don't know about you guys, but the more time I make for meditation and prayer, the calmer I feel. The more I spend in my life going, what do I need? What do I want? The less calm and safe and secure I feel. So my friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my creator. So when these things were done, step 1 to 12, um, and a new relationship. So this promise as well, it's so definite, isn't it? It's like we can actually, anybody that has gone through this process, I can absolutely agree with my hand on my heart. I can promise that when these things are done, I know that people are going to enter a new relationship with their creator. So that's 6 and 7, and that I would have the elements of a way of living. So a thick, squiggly underline, that way of living, and all the way through the book. There are loads of references. I haven't actually compiled them yet, but it says design for living, way of life, way of living. There's loads of references to it being a way of life, which answered all my problems. That's reassuring. What are my problems? My problems are my selfishness and my self centeredness. My problems are all of my character defects, which I start working my 6 and 7 to have them removed. Yeah, my problems, my hopelessness without this program. So belief in the power of God. There's a running thread throughout the whole book. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility. Beautiful words: willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain. So establish, to get that grounded, to set in stone this foundation, and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements that we can't do without it. We can't do without this willingness. Later on in the book, in the spiritual experience, it talks about, the who: willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness. Here it says willingness, honesty, and humility, knowing my right-sizedness. I cannot do this alone. I need God's help. I need my fellows. I need the literature. I need meetings. The clear-cut direction. This is one of my favorite bits of the book. It says simple, but not easy. A price had to be paid. Oh, it's it meant destruction of self-centeredness. Wow, that is that word alone, destruction. It's pretty harsh, isn't it? It meant destruction of self-centeredness. So I always say this, like, the simplicity of this book, of this program, is that I have this book. I have the clear cut direction. I have just 12 steps to follow. I have a sponsor who's going to guide me through the process. I have a home group. I have fellows. I have literature. I have all of the spiritual tools that are laid at my feet. I don't have to make up the program. I don't have to work it out or design a program. So all I need to do is simply follow the clear cut direction. But a price has to be paid, and the not easy bit is the destruction of self-centeredness, and that, my friends, is very, very, very uncomfortable. On page 27, I like linking it up. They're talking about the spiritual experience, but Roland Hazard and Carl Jung are having a chat, and he's saying that these huge emotional displacements and rearrangements, and I think, what's happening in my soul is I'm being shifted, I'm being changed, I'm being molded by God, and it's very, very uncomfortable. This letting go of all of my old ideas. It's like, this is everything I think I know, and you're asking me to lay it aside and forget everything, and just this destruction of all my ego and self-centeredness. Woo. But I mean, it's more painful living in the madness, really, isn't it? But I must. Oh, here we go. I've got a sign for this. Well, must. It's really shiny. Can you see how sparkly it is? I need to add more glue to that. It's falling apart. And so I must turn in all things. There's another all that's quite important. I must turn in all things to the Father of light, capital F, capital L, who presides over us all. And there's another all. And that used to just weird me out, Father of the light. But when we look through the book, there are so many different word definitions for the word God, because people are so freaked out by the word God, as I was. So this word can be whatever you want it to be, and it can mean whatever you want it to mean to you. But that's quite beautiful, and it's a reminder of all the things. If I'm still clinging on to an area of my life, I'm probably going to still find pain in it. So these were revolutionary. That's a big word. Absolutely life changing. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals. Isn't that the truth? But the moment I fully accepted them, question mark, have I fully accepted them? Have I come to believe, or am I willing to believe? Whether I'm a couple of months in, a couple of years in, nearly 40 years in, have I fully accepted that I can just begin again? I can restart my program, my willingness, my honesty, my humility over and over and over again. And this moment, I've always squiggly underlined where it says, moment, when it refers to how quickly I can tap back in. The moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. I don't know about you guys, but this is the kind of recovery that I'm seeking. I'm seeking people and meetings whose message of depth and weight is electric. I can feel the energy. I can kind of feel the aliveness of the people. There was a sense of victory, followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. That sounds beautiful, doesn't it? Peace and serenity. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of the mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. So this is Bill Wilson sharing with us his spiritual awakening. He feels like lifted up, this peace and serenity. And Peter M actually says that, this could have been Bill Wilson's, because his grandfather had an experience like this going up a mountain, and he came back and he spoke about this sudden and profound experience. And Peter M was like, oh, did Bill, kind of get this idea from his grandfather? But for a moment, I was alarmed. So he's in hospital and he's had this experience. I called my friend, the doctor, to ask if I was still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally, he shook his head, saying, something has happened to you. I don't understand, but you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were. So this line, I love this line in the book. Anything is better than the way you were. And sometimes when, you know, when myself or maybe a sponsee is not in a good place, maybe you're going through a bit of a spiritual funk, that's a really good place to come back to. Anything is better than the way you were. It reminds me to have gratitude, because whatever is going on externally, I can guarantee if I was drinking or using it, it would be a hell of a lot worse. So the good doctor now sees many men who have had such experiences. He knows that they are real. And I've got a question mark in there. And it's like, have you had an experience like this? Do you know other people who have had experiences where they were in utter hell, and then there it's followed by a sense of peace and serenity as they had never known. You know, this stuff is magic. How can I tap in to this incredible magic, even if I'm not feeling, 100%? While I lay in the hospital, the thought came, now this is really important. The thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. So Bill Wilson in hospital, suddenly thinking his step 12, and how beautiful that he who might be glad to have what has been so freely given me. I will never, ever, ever in my life forget my big book sponsor who sat with me hour after hour reading this book and so freely gave me her time and her experience, and what a gift it is to give that away. Perhaps I could help some of them. There's that thread again, helpfulness, help usefulness. They in turn might work with others. So this is the beautiful part, where Bill Wilson is thinking, right. And the quicker I can get into this, the quicker I can just go, oh yeah, how can I help someone else? The more we get this power in. So my friend had emphasized the absolute necessity. That sounds really strong, doesn't it? Emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. So that sounds like step 12, doesn't it? Having had a spiritual awakening, as the result of these steps, we tried to practice these principles. Oh my God, I'm stumbling on all the steps. Carry this message to other alcoholics and practice these principles in all of our affairs. So emphasize the absolute necessity and demonstrating. That doesn't mean just talking about it, right? That means actually living it, demonstrating that I've got these principles of love, honesty, integrity, humility, courage, service. Did I say honesty? I hope I did. So here we go, more like really strong language. Particularly, was it imperative? That means absolutely necessary, cannot do without. Imperative to work with others as he had worked with me? Question mark. So, am I working with others? Am I giving this away? Am I freely giving this away? Faith without works was dead. So it says that, I don't know how many times it says that in the book, actually. Faith without works was dead. But, I can have all the faith, I can understand the book, I can know the steps, I can believe in God, but unless I put it into action, it's dead. It's pointless. Faith without works was dead, he said. And how appallingly true for the alcoholic. Here we go. Here's a really strong warning. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. So, failed to perfect and enlarge. However we choose to do that, that spiritual growth, that spiritual stretching, that that giving ourselves of others, spiritual work and self-sacrifice for others. In the 60s, in page 60 to 62, it talks about self-pity, it's just self-seeking. And here it's like self-sacrifice. We're letting go of ourselves and we're giving to others. And this is like a promise, isn't it? Like a negative promise and a warning. He could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again. And if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. So these are kind of, this has been written 85 years, published 85 years ago. It's in black and white, and it's this thread of giving to others, helping others, is all the way through the book. And that's quite a strong warning here, isn't it? If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. And in my original book, I've got spiritually and or physically. On page 30, it says we pursue this into the gates of insanity and death. But actually, drinking and the insanity of not picking up the spiritual solution when knowing that I am an alcoholic or addict, that is a spiritual death, isn't it? That's me just living unconsciously. So my wife and I love this bit. My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm. So to abandon myself means to just leave something never to return. I never plan to go back. So abandon themselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics, plural, to a solution of their problems. So that sounds like a lifelong understanding. This is it. I have to spend the rest of my life helping other alcoholics. And enthusiasm means to be possessed. And what does it mean? Inspired and possessed from God. It comes from the Greek word enthusiasmos, something. To be inspired and possessed by God. Where are we? Yeah, it was fortunate for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. So what a blessing for him, and us, that he was able to actually dedicate everything to this. The same thing happened to me, and I know lots of people who that kind of happened to as well. Not everybody's story, obviously. I was not too well at the time. Here we go. This is reassuring. And I was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. So this is Bill Wilson. This is a couple of weeks prior. He was, in the hospital, and the great clean wind is blowing through and through. And he's having, scales of pride and prejudice are falling from his eyes. And then he's saying he's plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to a drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, so he's tried different other things, when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. I've put a big fat exclamation mark in there. I don't know if you've tried it yourself, sometimes being in self and then trying to do things again for myself to make myself feel better. And then sometimes it's like, it tells me again and again, remember, help someone else, help someone else, help someone else. And it does. It literally works when all other measures fail. So many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It is a design for living. So there it is again, that reference to this new way of life. It is a design for living that works in rough going. That's a promise. So we commence to make many fast friends, and a fellowship has grown up among us, of which it is a wonderful thing to feel a part. I haven't got a question mark in there, but do you feel connected? Do you feel a part of? Bill Wilson told about this loneliness and despair, this bitter morass of self-pity, in the quicksand that stretched around him. And then now it's like life is coming back. He's got a purpose. He's helping others. He's a part of this fellowship. He was scrambling before to become a part of life and to, get this money, property, and prestige. And he got it all. But he said back before, didn't he? There were many some horrible scenes in our sumptuous apartment. It's not horrible scenes, but yeah, many sad occasions. Um, so which is a wonderful thing to feel apart. The joy of living we really have even under pressure and difficulty. So that I've done a little arrow in my book from that line, the joy of living we really have even under pressure and difficulty, across the page where it says anything is better than the way you were. So I thought that was a good little link. I have seen hundreds of families set on their feet in a path that really goes somewhere. I have seen the most impossible domestic situations righted, feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in the lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. All of these statements are so big, aren't they? We've got literal facts and evidence in all of the people that we have heard in recovery who have shared their experiences about their lives being rebuilt. We've got our own experiences to go off, and now we've got the global fellowship and this book and the stories that I've heard myself. Even this stuff is absolutely magic. In one Western city and its environs just means outskirts, by the way. There are 1,000 of us and our families. We meet frequently so that newcomers may find the fellowship they seek. At these informal gatherings, one may often see from 50 to 200 persons. Wow, that is amazing, isn't it? Back in the day, just thinking about meetings of that size, you know, we are growing in numbers and power. So in 2001, AA is composed of over 100,000 groups. I don't know the stats now, but it's just amazing how we are growing in numbers and power. And I don't know why I'm just called to kind of reference the bit in the book where it talks about the success rate, 75% success rate. It's in the forward, isn't it, to the second? Is it forward to the second? Yeah, it's on page XX, it's on page 20. I just felt called to talk about this growing in numbers and power. So we've got more numbers now. Oh, thank you. In 2021, there were, oh, thanks, Reggie, 129,800 groups. That's amazing. So I was just called to kind of share that we're growing in numbers and power, but our success rate has dropped a lot, and back in the day, the reason why the success rate was so good is because they stuck very close to the clear cut direction, followed the 12 steps. That's absolutely where I want to be, and still absorbing all of this other spiritual literature, but just keeping it really simple, following the direction in this book. So, an alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature. Oh, question mark. It's quite harsh, but I can really relate to that. That's exactly how I felt, like an unlovely creature. Our struggles with them are variously strenuous, comic, and tragic. So that's a like, a big variety, isn't it? Like strenuous, a strain, a pain, funny, and tragic. One poor chap committed suicide in my home. And there are quite a few references in the book to suicide. And in the doctor's opinion, I've just put a little cross reference to page XXX, page 30, where in the doctor's opinion, he says, some people make the supreme sacrifice. And also in Two Employers, on page 136 and 137, if you just want to note it down, you don't have to flick there now because we've only got a few more minutes of the book study. Um, there are three references to people who have killed themselves. One hung themselves, one put a shotgun in his mouth, and the other one jumped out of a building. So this is very, very, very serious. And it says he could not or would not. And I've squiggly underlined he could not, but I've triple squiggly underlined would. So, or would not see our way of life. There's that way of life again. And I think on page 58, where it says constitutionally incapable of seeing our way of life, there is, however, a vast amount of fun about it all. I suppose some would be shocked at our seeming worldliness and levity. Levity meaning lightness of mind, character, and behavior. We're dealing with this deathly illness, this illness that ravishes the mind, body, and spirit. But here we are. And also, I'm just thinking of all these little cross references now in my head. But on page 132, where it says, we are not a glum lot. It's only when you come into the rooms and you start to hear people having a little giggle about their behavior when they were in the madness, and you're just like, oh, you're in the right place. But just underneath, there is a deadly earnestness. Oh, severity, serious, deadly earnestness. Faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. I really like that reminder, because I can find personally that I don't have this faith 24 hours a day at times. If I'm in fear, I can't be in faith. And it's reminding us, that actually this access to this faith is always there, or we perish. My mind can start tripping out and my old ideas can come pouring back in. Most of us feel we need to look no further for utopia. Utopia is like this ideal perfection, this fantasy land. And there's a little link here. What have I got? So it's only in two places in the book, and it's on page 61 and 16. So I like little ways of helping me remember where things are. So 1:6 and 6:1, and utopia, all would be utopia. So there's two references to it in the book. And this idea that, because it says we have it with us right here and now. So this idea of heaven on earth is here with us right here and now. It's just about being open to seeing it. Each day, my friend's simple talk, I love that, simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. Bill W., co-founder of AA, died January 24th, 1971. 75 years old. He died on his 53rd wedding anniversary, and he was 36 years sober. If you didn't get that, died 75 years old, 53rd wedding anniversary, and he died 36 years sober. So yeah, we're coming up to the end of the book study. So yeah, Bill's story, amazing, example of what he was like, what happened, and what he turned into after he had worked his steps, and we're looking for that identification and asking ourselves loads of questions in there and asking sponsees. So I'm actually going to stop right there because it's a nice place. I'll just stop the recording. Thank you so much for being here.